I'm Bob Rosendahl.
And I'm Rick Rosendahl.
Welcome to the Router Workshop. As Rick and I travel across the North American continent doing seminars and woodworking shows, we run across many people with routers. In the past 10 years, we've run into thousands of people that have routers that really never get around to using them for a whole lot of things. And in this series, we'd like to address some of those problems, see if we can come up with solutions, because there's so many things you can do with your router. Rick, what are we going to do today?
Today what we're going to show you is the types of routers available, the parts of the router bit, how the router cullet works, cutting without a fence, show you the proper direction of feed, and introduce the rabbit cut. Now, let's join Bob in the workshop.
Seeing this series is about routers, and we're going to use routers to make many projects and things here, I'd like to have a basic look at them all. But all of them come in two categories, really. We have the first one that originally came out was what they called a barrel-type router. That is, it had a motor that was mounted within a base, and became the barrel was simply because it slipped inside. This one has little notches on it, and we have a threaded lock pin to it, so it slides up and down in it. The bad thing about it was we couldn't really do any plunge work with it, and when we did get it inside and you got your depth set, and then when you went to tighten this down, what it did was kind of kick it over to one side, so it really wasn't an accurate thing to use guides with. The router that I've got here is a very small one. It's about a 2.5 amp one in it, but it did the job at the time. And it was an older type router, and again, it was a barrel type router. They're still available today, and for certain jobs, they are good to use for that. But anyway, the last one that came out in here, and we'll just set this aside here, was the plunge router. And for those of you that are shopping for routers, I would encourage you to buy a plunge type router, mainly because of its accuracy to use, its ease of using, and you'll notice that it plunges up and down, and it has springs in it. And the idea of the springs is for doing internal routing particularly, or inlays, and the inlays, what you'd have to do is get inside of a cavity. Once you position the router, you could pop it down there. There's a lock at the back side. This lock locks down, locks it into place. When you get done, it comes back up again. With the other barrel-type router, you're obligated to tip it into the workpiece, and that's not a very good procedure. It also has a locking mechanism on that side, but we also have a locking mechanism in the front that becomes a pull stop, and we can set the depth on it, so we can set it down inside of it. And I think the most unique thing about it is, too, is that it will hold router bits with a capacity of a 1/2-inch shank, so that you can not only use a 1/4-inch shank bit in it, which has a sleeve in it, we can use 1/4, 3/8, and we can use the 1/2. So we've got the three sizes of the basic things. Not often do we see 3/8 shank bits anymore, but you still get a sleeve with it, and you could use it for it. One other little caution here, and from safety, and we like to work around the safetiness in it, is be careful with the metric things that are out. Sometimes metric sizes come very close to our English sizes, and you may end up with a collet that's an American size in here for us inch measurements, but we'll end up with a metric. And the metric difference is only about 1 millimeter, and you try to get the bit in and you wonder why it doesn't stay tight. That's because it's a metric size. And so make sure that it is a 1/4-inch shank that you're putting into a 1/4-inch collet. Don't mix the two. With the plunge type router in it, it happens to be a larger one, and I would again recommend that you buy one that size, because a 15 amp router will handle most of the jobs that you want to do. And again, the nice thing about it is the balance. If you're using it as a freehand router, the handles always stay with the weight of the motor as opposed to being down on the base. Well, having done that with these router things in it, one of the first things I guess we look at is safety, and I'm going to move these just out of the way here for a second. I guess from safety standpoints of it, we look at the first thing is yourself. Don't wear anything with sleeves on it. Don't have anything dangles in it. And above all, watches, rings, and jewelry. So I'll just use this little sample box to store that in. We'll put my watch down in it. Don't have any rings on here. It's amazing how many people can get things in raggy clothes and things. You could get tangled up in the bit, and the last thing you want to do is get caught in that. People, it's kind of neat, this little box again. We're going to come back to that, and I'll show it to you again as a sample. But first, let's look at what we've done with this router. You'll see the back black plate that we have in here, and that's a mounting plate. This mounting plate in here has 4 screw holes, because that's the mounting design of it. It'll also hold 3, so if you have a Sears Porter Cable Black & Decker, they'll probably fit inside of there. So a lot of the barrel-type routers will fit there. Some of the larger ones will also fit in the 4 holes along with this plunge router. You'll notice that I'm hanging it upside down, and when I did that, we took the springs out of it. See how easy it works? Now you pull the catch on the back side, and it's right there. Purpose of that idea is so that you're not compressing the springs and lifting the weight of the router at the same time. So we got a really ease of operation. Also, we have a large hole in the inside edge here to allow the cutting of the bits. I'd like to take a real quick look in here. If you can maybe even see, we have a smaller hole, and we'll come back to that because that's a very unique situation. I think one of the first things we'll start with here today is we'll start and make a picture frame. There's many frames available out here that we've done and sizes of it, and these are just a couple. This one has an oval cut inside of it, and on the back side, you look, we've routed out a patch in the back to apply the picture in your backing piece. It also has a slot in here, and that slot is designed to hang it with. This particular one, we got a neat little picture of my grandson. We started him out early at our family. He's holding a router there. This one's got it in. We got some neat little corners in here, and it just gives a little design, and you'll also notice that we put a little bead around it. 90% of what people do with their routers is probably done of putting some kind of a decoration around a frame, and I think most people use their routers only for that. Well, we're going to get carried away in this series and do a lot of things with routers besides put beads around, but today we'd like to show you some of the procedures of making a picture similar to this. We'll set those picture frames aside here, and I got a blank piece. I pre-cut this out. Now this pre-cut piece out here has two holes in it, and they're heart-shaped. One's a little larger than the other, and there's some little procedures that are kind of neat to keep not only your fingers out of the way, but keep a little bit of the tear and wood, because you know as you go inside of here, what we're doing is cutting not only with the grain in some places, sometimes it's across the grain. Now in this piece of wood that I have, we've cut these corners out in it, and I want to turn it over on the other side. Anytime you're building anything, people, when you get everything lined up to what you're doing, always pick a face side. That is, pick a face side or a side that you like to show the best. And in this case, we got a lot of knots in here, but that was for purpose to show you as we can cut through. I'm just going to put a light X on it with a pencil. Keep a pencil mark in it. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to chuck up a router bit, and a router bit that'll do this outside edge. So I'm going to set this aside. We'll tip this router back up. And isn't it nice when you can get it out here and change the cutters? Because if you're up, down underneath your bench, you can't see what you're doing. Well, we'll just set it there for a second, and I'm going to reach in my tray here and pick up a router bit. And there's a few little things about router bits that we should keep in mind. This happens to be an OG bit, a Roman OG bit. What makes it that is its pattern, and on the one top edge in here, we've got a cove cutter. It simply comes down into a nice smooth line in here and picks a round over of it. It also has a square shoulder of that, and we're going to talk about it. It does have a bearing. And as safety, again, from a safety standpoint, remember every time you buy a brand new router bit, it's going to be dipped in some protective plastic material in it. Make sure when you peel that off that you take an Allen key, because that is an Allen key nut in the end in here, and you make sure that you tighten that bearing on. Sometimes those are just put in finger tight, and then when you start up your router, that could come apart and you'd be in problems with it. So tighten it in. Second thing, I think after you get started with your router bits, and on every occasion, whenever you come to putting a new cutter in, grab the bearing in your fingers and rotate the bit in the side of it. Make sure that the bearing flows smoothly. If it refuses to turn or it's sticky or any manner in it, change the bearing. Don't buy any kind of can of guck and spray on it to try to do it. It is a sealed bearing, and it's not worth it. Here's what happens. When we start that router bit up in the router, and that router will run about 22,000, that bearing spins at the same speed that the bit does. When you approach it with a piece of material, it skids to a stop and stands there. If it won't turn, it rubs, and when it rubs, it gets hot. If that bearing gets hot, it'll expand and the pieces can explode. And I've seen it happen on several occasions. Those pieces, you have no idea where they might flow. Well, the next big thing here is let's chuck it up. We've checked it, the bearing's smooth in it, let's put it in the chuck. Now, you'll hear that go down into the bottom there. I always get asked when we're out doing our shows and our seminars, most of the questions I get we're going to try to answer here, and this is one of the frequent ones we get, is how far down in the router do you put that? Well, let's take this chuck out of here, the collet from the chuck, and just show you the difference and how it operates. There's two things to it. This system that I've got in here, on the one it's got a collet and it's got a cut. On the other side it's also got a cut, and on this side it goes right through. So what it is a tapered chuck, and I don't know how we can get a real good look at this, but that taper in here goes inside of the chuck, and when you tighten it down, it squeezes, and with the slot hole in it, allows it to squeeze tight, so when the bit is in it, it puts the squeeze on the shank of it. If that shank happens to be touching down in the bottom of the chuck piece, down in there, when it does that, it has to slip down the side of the shank, and when it does that, it'll put a burr in it, and then you'll never get it out again, and you've got that tight inside of it. So you've got to make sure that it's up a little bit. Keep it about 1/16 of an inch. The second reason for doing it is that router bits generate a tremendous amount of heat, and the heat generated with the cutter in here will be transferred through the shank down into the motor itself and cause it to run hotter than it should. So people, when you do that, just put it down inside of here. I'm going to take it out. We'll screw it down. And while I'm doing that, keep in mind that that collet should be taken out on several occasions, particularly you're using pine or any type gummy wood. And what you need to do with that is clean it. Just take it out and clean it every once in a while. You won't have any problems with it. Now, you can hear that go down to the bottom. Put it right to the bottom. Pull it out about a 1/16. Now we got to tighten it. This particular unit comes with 2 wrenches. I'm a person that I like the 2 wrenches. The thing that gets me sometimes, they are a different size, so either hand you got it, it's wrong. But I think maybe it'll work in fine. Now, when we pull this together in here, tighten it down. We got the bit tightened down. Now, tighten it up, put it back in here, put the wrenches away, raise the cutter in. Once we get the cutter into place in here, we'll rotate that bit. And remember, I've got it unplugged. I haven't plugged the router in yet. Anytime you're doing any setting, don't get caught up in there and having it plugged in. Well, what we're going to do is the outside edges in it. And when we do these outside edges in it, what we're going to find in here that we should do is so this bit turns in this direction. And remember, when you've got your router in here, that the router bit turns in that direction. It should always feed towards you. And you feed the workpiece into the rotation of the bit. You never run with it. Well, when we do that, that cutter comes in contact with the material before we get up to the pilot, so it wants to take the stick away. That's why we always use a safety pin. That safety pin has got a little brass pin, and it's got a piece right down in that hole, fits right in it. So remember, your base plate has that hole towards you. Now we're up against the pin, and it can't take it away. Once you get up tight to that, right up to the bearing and running on it, you're fine. But it's always there, so if something happens, take it away. Well, we got that cured in it. Let's stick up the next thing in here. Which one do we start with? We got the end grain on the boards this way. You always do the end grain first, then you come with the grain, across the grain, and with the grain. That's the procedure. So what about height of bit? Well, the height of the bit, we're going to raise that up. And what we've got in here is raised it up so that we got that square shoulder cutting in just a little. The idea of the square shoulder is so that you don't have a real fine edge to have to sand afterwards. Remember, I got the face side in here. We'll turn it over because we always work face down, and we'll start. Now, I'm going to start, keep it against the pin there, make sure it's cleared away, and it's in an off position, and we'll plug the router in, and we're away. Now, there's the first cut. We've got the first cut across here. Now what we're going to do is come up. We've got a little bit of end grain in here that tears in it, but most of the time you got enough speed in there to work, and then we'll come down the side. Just have a peek at what we're doing here. We'll stop at this point. Now we've got this nice decorative edge around in here. We're going to stop at this point because this last one in it, sometimes we get caught in a bad grain. And when we get caught in a bad grain, we may have to score it first so it doesn't keep tearing. Here's scoring. Now we got the scoring done. Once this scoring gets done in here, it breaks up the grain so that when you come with your router now, it won't dig back inside of it. So now we'll do it again. We'll just finish up. You can see the big chip that I got off of here, and that chip came off the side, but we still got a nice clean cut. Now we've got the other side in it. We didn't do anything with the inside edge. What's so neat about an OG bit is that we can lower that cut down if we wish and only pick up the cove part of it. But now we take the pin out. And when we take the pin out there, remember that we don't put your fingers on the inside, you keep them on the outside. And again, we're on the inside edge, so we'll feed to the inside. Now we got a nice coved edge on the inside of the frames, and we got the OG on the outside of the frames. But what we don't have is we don't have a groove in the back side. We need to put a groove in the back side so that you can put your picture in. So let's just tip that router up. And don't forget to unplug your router each time. So we unplug the router. And we'll come down here. Of course, I had to drop the wrench there. You see that happens when you got two of them. We'll change cutters. And the bit that we're going to put in. Have a close look at it. We got a bearing on it, and it flows smoothly. It's a rabbiting bit. And we have a cutter on either side. The depth of it can be set whatever, but the distance from the bearing over to it, and that's a standard bit, is a rabbiting bit, and it's a 3/8 size rabbiting bit. Now, drop it down inside, set it in. Don't bolt your router down, just leave it there. Now the height of the bit is whatever the thickness of the picture and the backing cardboard that you might have with it. So we'll just set the height in it. Now, once we get that set in, again, we do not use the safety pin because we're on the inside edge. So being on the inside edge here, we'll be able to pick this up and come down. So let's see if we get some power here again. Make sure that it's not in contact and the switch is in the off position. Ready to go. See the nice little groove in the back side? That groove in there will provide a spot so that you can place your picture and your backing material. We still have this one to do. So what we'll do is just take and clean that away here, and we'll go back on side and do it once more. We got the last one now. If by chance that there was for some reason that you wanted to put a piece of glass in here, for goodness sakes, don't go to your glass cutter and ask him to put a piece of glass that shape in. He'll wonder what you're up to in here, and it'll cost you a fortune. What you need to do with your frame is go to a different type pattern. You can go to a pattern in here using a guide, and you can cut this backside out. Once you get this backside cut out here, then it's square. You can put the glass in if you like. This one particular one, router bits leave round corners. We do have some round corners in it. But what happens in it, if you take those out, you can square them up or chip the end of the glass, just cut the corners off of it and get by with that too. So now we've got a picture frame in it. We've got many customers out there that make a real good living selling picture frames of all different designs inside and the different designs outside. And we always laughed at a gentleman we've got out there. He makes frames like this, and some of them he puts ovals, some of them put hearts in it. And he told me one time he makes slightly over 10,000 frames a year, and I said, John, don't you ever get tired of making frames? He said, no, Bob. He said, I get $8.95, and every time I put one in the box, I just think $8.95. So that's what keeps him going. I guess that's the fun part of doing things, and people, sometimes you don't need a whole lot of things to get a lot of fun out of your router and get it to work in the way it should be. Again, it's nice to tip this router up, pop it in here, and take the router bit out. But again, make sure that you unplug your router each time that you do it. Now, once we get this set in here, put the wrenches back in it, take this out. If you'll notice in here, what I've done is today, to start with here, we've used two router bits. We used a Roman OG bit to make the pattern, and we've used a rabbiting bit. Those are the two. If we wanted to put this groove in the back, that would make up the third cutter that you'd need. And they call that a keyhole bit, and it plunges in and lets a slot up. A very easy operation. You can either put it sideways or flat, whichever you wish in it. Now, once we get that set up in here to go, we can do whatever project we have in it. And the next project that we're going to work on in here would be, you could choose it, whether it's another picture frame with a different design, whatever. But that's picture frame design. That's the basic things of routing.
Let's review what we learned on today's show. Before using your new pilot router bit, make sure the bearing is tight. And whenever you use a pilot bit, make sure that the bearings turn freely. Remember to pick and mark the face side on your material. And the face side is placed face side down when you're routing. Always feed your work into the rotation of the router bit. Cut the end grain first, then with the grain. And when you're making inside cuts, be sure to keep your fingers on the outside. Scoring is used to prevent chip out on irregular grain pattern material. Now, let's visit the Router Workshop Gallery for examples of what you can make using the techniques learned on today's show. Thanks, Dad. That was a really neat project with that picture frame. Now let's talk about the different kinds of profiles. To start with, we'll talk about the common profiles. I have two of them here. One which is the roundover bit, which is this one here, and the shape of that is just on the edge of this piece of oak. If you can see just the shape of the roundover, I'll just go ahead and put a line on it, mark it, if I can get that line to mark. There we go. And the other common shape is on the other side of this, and that's the cove bit. That's down here. If you can see that shape on this side, it's all along this edge here. The two bits, if you notice, this is the cove bit on the top part here. The shape of the tool and the shape of the piece of material that you're using is opposite, isn't it? So we have the cove, which is the opposite, and the round over here, which gives us the opposite. Let's take a look now at that Romanoji bit that Dad used this morning, or today. Now I'll take out this rabbiting bit that was with it. There's the rabbiting bit giving you the straight line. Here's the Romanoji bit with the cove on the top. Then there's a straight line that bridges the two, and then there's the roundover on the bottom. They all carry a bearing on the top. Most bits will carry those three lines. We're going to have a line, a cove, and a roundover bit. Let's take a look at another bit that does the same thing again, and I'll move some of these tools out of the way, and let's take a good look at it. This one here is a classical bit, and what it's got is the cove on the top, then you'll see the straight line along the bottom, and then the roundover bit comes back around, and you'll finish off with the straight line again. This bit here, to tell the size of the bits, is based on the radius of the curves. So this curve here is, and in this case, this is called a 3/16 classical bit. So this is 3/16, then it goes straight, then this is 3/16 here, giving you the top line on the unit. Let's set these aside for a second, and let's bring on two other bits here. The first one I'm going to bring in here is going to be the cove. And if you remember the first time we had it, this is the bit that we used, which is just the straight cove bit. Now what we've got on the profile is we've got the grinding on the edge, which gives us the line, and then it gives us the cove, and then it grinds another line in it to give us another cove. They call this the bead, cove, bead. So it's got the two lines in it. The line that's inside here now is called a bead. So here's the bead, the cove, and the bead. As different from what the other one is, which is just over here, just as the cove bit. We'll set those two aside now, and let's look at the roundover bit, and we'll look at its partner or person that's close to it. Again, I'll bring the roundover bit back in here. Here's just the roundover by itself, and when you get a beading bit, what you get is, the way they do that is by changing the size of the bearing. If you can notice between these two bits here, this bearing here is smaller than this one. The beading bit has got the top edge, again if you can see this, the back has been background, and on a roundover bit, that's not so. What happens is, because they just use it as a roundover bit, they don't backgrind it. So if you were looking at buying just one bit and you couldn't afford to, what you'd want to do is get the beading bit, because what the beading bit has is the back grind on it, and it can interchange both bearings. Whereas the roundover bit doesn't have the back grind on it, and you can't interchange the two bearings. The reason you can't, again, is if you don't have the back grinding, what it has a tendency to do is burn. And now for a quick tip on your bearings. Let's look at the bit that we've got here first. We've got a beading bit. And what you want to make sure when you purchase the bit, or if you've got a damaged bit or bearing, is to be able to change it. And let's just look at this now. I'll take this bit out of this little holder here. And what we have a problem with is that the edges of the tools are sharp. So what I've suggested here is a couple of pine sticks, something easy. They're very soft, so they're going to be able to work with it and not damage your cutting edges of your tools. A couple of things that you should look at when you're making one of these is, number one is that it should have all rounded edges on it, so that when you put your hands on it that you're able to grip it very easily and not get hurt doing that. And the other thing is that the thickness of the piece or the width of the piece should be small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Let's go ahead and take the pieces here now, and I'm just going to set the beading bit on the unit, put the top piece on it, and trap it between the two sticks. Once you've got it trapped, you want to hold it tight, get it into a position so that you can get the Allen key on it, and then all we need to do is loosen it. Makes it quick and simple, or if you're tightening your bits, you can do that as well. Once you've got it so that you can loosen it, then you can go ahead and grab onto the tool and finish the job. All we want to do is break it or tighten it up so that we're able to get it to the tightness that we're looking at. Let's take a few seconds here now and take a good close look at the bearing. On the bearing, in most cases, all cases in fact, is that they have an inside race and an outside race. The inside race of the bearing runs at the same speed as the tool cutter, and the outside race is the one that skids to a stop when you go ahead and touch it with something. What you have to make sure is that all the little ball bearings that are in between that are serviced properly. And to do that, it's very quick and simple. All we need to do is check it. You can feel the bearings if they're rough or whatever, and if they're not, they're in good order.
The router is the most versatile tool that you have in your workshop. Get it out of its box, put it to use, and have some fun. I'm Bob Rosendahl.
I'm Rick Rosendahl, and thank you for joining us at the Router Workshop.